Representative Raymond Dehn, thanks for being with us here as we look ahead to the 2020 session. Since 2013, you've represented one of the busiest parts of the state, most of downtown Minneapolis, but you also have an area north of Interstate 394 and west of Interstate 94, making your district one of the, if not most diverse in terms of business versus residents. What sort of issues or priorities are important to your constituents?
Yeah, it's a very interesting district. Of course, I always remind people that I live in North Minneapolis, not downtown. A lot of people make the assumption that I live downtown, but North Minneapolis has been my home now for about 20 years. And, we have a part of the district that has somewhat struggled economically and for lots of reasons. There's often a reputation that gets painted on the north side that I think is really not a valid reputation, but every major metropolitan area needs to have something that they can point to, say, where things are really bad. And then of course downtown, and one of the largest growing neighborhoods in the state, let alone maybe even the country, the North Loop area.
Taking a look at your Twitter bio, it says you're, quote, a criminal justice reformer, environmentalist, and affordable housing expert. Why are these areas important to you?
Well, criminal justice is an important thing to me just because of my history in my past. I engaged the criminal justice system when I was really young, and that had to do with my addiction and other types of things. And when I think about the issues of affordable housing, it's even more critical today than it was when I ran in 2012. We definitely have a shortage. The cost of housing continues to climb, and we're not replacing those affordable housing units in the way that we need to. So we really need to begin to focus that. I'm really excited with the governor's bonding proposal that's actually going to provide quite a bit of bonding money for building the units of housing that we need, both generally as well as targeting affordable housing. The environment, I'm the only member in the legislature that's a LEED accredited professional, leadership in environment and energy and design. And it's something that I've been passionate about most of my adult life, going even back to when I was an adolescent. And there's an urgency today like nothing else. And I think we spend a lot of time talking about stuff relative to 2040, 2050. Personally, I think that's too late. We need to start talking about 2025 and 2030 and what are those changes that we're going to make in policy to not save the planet, because the planet's going to go on, but really to save humans and our ability to inhabit this planet.
Let's go back to the affordable housing for a second. You mentioned the governor's bonding proposal. Realistic shot for that to happen this year?
I think a significant portion of it. In the past, I'm trying to think the year it was, whether it was 13, 14, or 15, where we had $200 million for housing as part of our bonding bill, but that included the portion for repairs and things relative to the public housing. So I think there's a good chance that we could get something north of $200 million relative to housing in the bonding bill.
Opinions have varied between Minneapolis city leaders, police leaders, business owners, and the public on resolving public safety issues in downtown Minneapolis, especially the warehouse district. Is the perception reality, and can the state do anything to help?
Is perception reality? Of course, everybody's perception is their own reality. If you look at crime statistics over time, Minneapolis is in some ways safer today than it was 10, 20 years ago. And when you look at the incidences of crime. There have been a few high-profile incidences, and a large part of the activity around some criminality happens in the downtown entertainment district on weekends, and that is what I would say is something that is typical of many major cities throughout the country. I think that there's a big concern about what that perception is, because we have an incredible number of Fortune 500s companies and larger companies in downtown Minneapolis, and of course they're recruiting throughout the whole United States and the world to bring people here as part of their workforce. So that's something that's really, really critical. Relative to policing, I still think we have a long ways to go in thinking about the way we police in a different way in the city of Minneapolis, and I think that the current city leaders are wrestling with that. I think we'll see some things at the state, unfortunately, that will be calling out some of the numbers of homicides in both Minneapolis and St. Paul this past year, and that maybe Minneapolis and St. Paul aren't doing a good job of policing. I don't think that that's the cause of that. I think the cause of that probably has a lot to do with individuals' life situation, a lot to do with drug addiction, a lot to do with really poverty, and that we're really not doing the job to address and alleviate some of the poverty that currently exists. So I think all this stuff is interconnected. It's not separate. And I think it's time we start talking about that interconnectedness of these factors that impact people's perception of feeling safe in whether it's Minneapolis, St. Paul, Duluth, Rochester, any of our larger cities in the state.
You chair the House Subcommittee on Elections. Last session, progress was made in the way of election security funding, but in today's world, is that enough, or is there more work to be done to protect our elections?
Well, there's more federal funding coming our way, and we'll have to approve receiving that funding, because we're one of the few states that legislatively we have to actually vote affirmatively to accept that money from the federal government. The federal government's made it very clear the election security is critical. There are a lot of bad actors out there in the world trying to infiltrate and cause havoc in our systems. It was a lot of work to get that money actually approved, which it shouldn't have been, but it was. And I think that sucked the air out of a lot of the stuff we were trying to do, whether it was related to automatic voter registration, reforming some of the financing relative to elections and independent expenditures. Several other things, of course, Restore the Vote is something I've been passionate about my whole time here. So I'm hoping that we'll be able to have a conversation about those critical issues. And of course, we have a census that's about to take place. So in 2021, we will go through a process of redistricting. And the current Constitution requires the legislature to draw those lines. And there was a couple proposals brought forward last year to create an independent commission. And we'll be exploring that again this year.
Last year, you introduced House File 265 to legalize recreational cannabis through a constitutional amendment. Didn't get much traction, but do you think 2020 may be different?
Possibly, I don't know. The House caucus has been working, the DFL caucus in the House, working really, really diligently over the past couple months to frame what a legal adult use cannabis industry would look like in our state, all those factors that come into play. And so we've been working really, really hard. The idea of a constitutional amendment is nearly every state except one has passed legalization of cannabis use for adults through some type of ballot initiative. In Minnesota, the only ballot initiative we have is changing the Constitution. So it's hard to say, but I'm really glad we're doing the work that we need to do to get a bill framed and the industry ready to go, so that should we be able to pass it in the legislature, or at some point if it goes to the people of Minnesota, that we'll be ready to move forward what I would say is a well thought out, well conceived legalization of adult use cannabis.
And what else do you have on your plate for the upcoming session?
There's some stuff in public safety that I'm really, public safety and criminal justice reform that I'm really concerned about. Last year I carried the bill for the juvenile life without parole, which is actually changing our state, that juveniles need to have an opportunity for reconsideration of their sentences. There's been federal lawsuits and there's been federal rulings relative to this, and Minnesota is very much behind on what we're doing. So trying to move that forward, I think, will be important. You know, there's some issues around probation, short of passing legal adult use cannabis. I'll probably be looking again at the quantities variances within our drug laws. Currently, you know, you can have up to 1.5 ounces of cannabis, and it's a petty misdemeanor. Once you go above that, it goes straight to a felony. So I think there should be some gradation relative to quantities. So I'll try to move that forward. And again, I'll be really speaking loudly about restore the vote, as we're seeing other states like Florida, Louisiana, Kentucky move forward with restoration of voting rights for those individuals that have committed felonies in their past. I think it's time that the state of Minnesota move forward with that too.
And finally, for a little fun, it's a long time since we've partied like it's 1999. You sponsor House File 2360 that would provide $250,000 in arts and cultural heritage funds for a mural in downtown Minneapolis to honor the legacy of Prince. Can you talk a little bit about that bill?
Yeah,
that's why it's important.
It's an important bill, I think, because, you know, Prince has been a critical part not just of the Minneapolis music scene, but really the whole world. And you know, his passing was a sad day for many of us. I think that ultimately we should recognize him in the same way that we've recognized Bob Dylan as those individuals in Minnesota who are, you know, really critical. And to have a mural that's within, you know, the same view as First Avenue, which of course Prince was critical in sort of elevating the popularity of that nightclub throughout the United States and the world. I think having something that recognizes him and what he's not only meant to the music scene, but what he's meant for pretty much all of Minnesota.